Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Thriving Adoptees podcast. So today I'm delighted to be joined by Crystal. Crystal, welcome to the show. Thank you for making time for us today.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me today.
Yeah. It's great to have you on the show. So could you introduce yourself to the audience, please, Crystal?
Sure. My name is Crystal Young, and I am the Executive Director of Hope Center Adoption and Family Services. We are a local nonprofit adoption agency located in Cookeville, Tennessee.
Cookeville, Tennessee. So Tennessee has a place close to my heart because a good friend of mine, one of my first American friends many years ago, was from Lookout Mountain.
Okay. Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. So how far did we have this conversation before? Whenever I speak to somebody from Tennessee, I say, do you know Lookout Mountain? So I can't remember whether we.
Yeah, I do know Lookout Mountain, and I recall you mentioning going to Nashville, but
Yeah.
not to Lookout Mountain. So yeah, it's about the same distance actually, between Cookeville, Nashville and Cookeville, Chattanooga area where Lookout Mountain is. So yes, very close.
Yeah, I've not actually been to Lookout Mountain. I did go to Nashville just before COVID for a big
Okay.
conference. But yeah, I sometimes think of, I sometimes email somebody online who I think it is this. So there's this lady called Ellen Mason Exum was at a language school with me in Germany, and we got on really well. And she had the same birthday as me, and it's probably the first. My hairdresser has the same birthday as me.
You got a common birthday there.
Sorry? Yeah, but I just find I get on well with people that I'm not a believer in star signs and things like that. But so Cooksville, Tennessee. So why did you? Because it's if I remember correctly from when we spoke last month, it's relatively recently that you set up the agency. Is that right?
That's correct. Yes. So we are in our third year of operation.
Yeah.
As an agency, we opened our doors in 2018.
Yeah. And why did you set it up, Crystal?
We started the agency out of a desire to see a private nonprofit Christian adoption agency here in the Upper Cumberland. There are no other agencies like our agency here in our region. Most adoptive families were either adopting through the state, so fostering to adopt, or they were just going through an attorney who had a connection to a birth mother. And so we wanted to bring the agency to Cookeville to help service the families who needed that local connection, who wouldn't have to go outside to kind of the bigger metropolitan areas of Nashville or Knoxville or Chattanooga to receive the adoption services. And then, of course, for birth moms, just a place for them to connect locally as well and eliminate some of the barrier of transportation and travel.
Yeah. And so you've got that very, very much that local focus. So I'm guessing that you focused in on in your community and understanding their needs. Yeah. Would that be fair?
Yes, absolutely. So understanding our community's needs, that's probably the most accessible community that we have, obviously being here in the Upper Cumberland. And so we get that question often, do you only work in the Upper Cumberland or do you work beyond the Upper Cumberland? And the answer to that is yes, absolutely. We have the ability to go beyond the Upper Cumberland, but our office is here and my staff is here. And as we continue to grow, that is a hope and a dream to have offices beyond this region to help families in local communities beyond the Upper Cumberland.
Yeah. So before I hit record, you said that the one of the key areas that you wanted to make that you thought distinguished you from other agencies other than the location is the fact that you really care about birth mothers and adoptees and adoptive families. What do you mean by that? What do you mean by that?
Sure. Yeah, I think it's just an intentionality that we maintain from start to finish with the adoption journey for every family, for every birth family that engages with us. We never want this to be transactional, so to speak, like a start and a finish, but we really desire to walk in relationship with families that are engaging in this journey. And so for myself and my staff, it's for adoptive families, it's maintaining a low and affordable fee schedule that is well below the national average for completing an adoption. For our birth mothers, it's creating community and connection around the decision to place a child for adoption. We've done that through our birth mom support group that meets quarterly, and we've had over 20 women engage in that group, and some of those women placed well over 50 years ago, placed a child for adoption well over 50 years ago. So through the group and through that intentionality, women have been able to connect to the stories of other women as well, and some sharing for the first time that they placed a baby for adoption. And so it's revealed just that level of secrecy that oftentimes is around adoption from a birth mother's side. And we never want to force a woman to share that, but we definitely want to create the space where she can share that information and just find the support that she needs.
Okay. So when you hear this phrase, thriving adoptees, what comes to your mind, Crystal?
What comes to my mind is really individuals and men and women who have been adopted either domestically or internationally, but who are doing well in life. And by well, I mean like well-being, mental well-being, spiritual well-being, physical well-being, in light of their adoption story. I think, adoption is so unique and is so special, but it also brings with it a layer and level of trauma too. And when I think of the word thriving, I think despite those factors, these are men, women, children who are just doing so well. They're processing well, they're living lives, they're enjoying life, and they're thriving where they are. They're sharing their story, they're finding connection, they're encouraging, they're being encouraged. So that's what comes to my mind.
Yeah. So what have you learned that because you worked for the state, if I remember correctly, before you set up your agency? What is it that you've learned that helps all those things happen? Because we've got adoptive parents listening to this who I'm sure share 100% what you're, I'd share 100% your goal for their kids. So what is it that you've learned that helps that happen?
Well, many things. What immediately comes to mind is transparency and honesty and openness in adoption. My agency specializes in placing infants. And so, we see a lot of children being placed just after birth, but have also placed an older child. And, what we learned through that situation, it was just the level of transparency and the level of openness that the adoptive family demonstrated towards that child. He seemed to reciprocate that back so well. And he knew from day one that he was loved and that he was welcomed and that he was accepted. And for the adoptive family, they knew that they wanted to honor his birth mom at every chance that they get with him, and sharing his story and just not hiding the fact that he's adopted. I mean, it's to him, I think, well, it's kind of obvious. He's woken up, for many years with the same mother, and then his world has changed tremendously, and he's got this family with other siblings. And, it's never a secret to him that this change has occurred, but yet he's walking into a place that's going to love him and fill him with all of the things that he needs to thrive through the rest of his childhood and into adulthood. So those are some pretty key indicators that I've learned to when you hold those and you demonstrate them, you tend to have a better outcome. A child tends to have a better outcome as they grow through adulthood.
Yeah. So you touched on a couple of different things in the description. You talked about physical well-being, emotional well-being and spiritual well-being. Can you break those down for me? What that means for you, and what you think helps that happen? So you can take any which one that you want.
Sure. Well, I think just starting with mental and emotional well-being. How healthy is the mind? I'm speaking, are you saying just what in adoptees specifically? Is that what you're
Yeah.
asking?
So
Okay.
given the audience is adoptive parents, what is it that you can share about adopted kids' mental and emotional well-being that you would want adoptive parents to hear?
Sure. Well, I think one of the most important things I would like to share and just talk through is just brain development and healthy brain development. I am not a neuroscientist, so I'm not claiming that title. But I will say from just what we are learning about trauma in the brain and how the brain grows and develops. I think for adoptive parents, especially, I want them to be encouraged, because a lot of times I think adoptive parents hear the word trauma and it's automatically like, oh my gosh, something is wrong. Something's going to be wrong. What does this mean long term? But I think for adoptive parents to know and understand that when you are adopting a child who's been carried by another woman from 9 months in utero, and that baby is separated from that woman and placed in your arms, the things that you do to bond and attach with your baby are going to help and result in hopefully just good positive brain development and attachment. And so a lot of adoptive parents ask us, is the baby going to bond with me, or can I love, the baby as much as I would my own biological child? And I always answer, yes, absolutely. Like, that's not impossible. It's not impossible for your child to bond appropriately and to attach with you, and for you to be pouring into your child and investing well in their development. Those are the factors that tend to result in that positive outcome for a child. So a lot of times I just think adoptive families, they feel like they have to know everything, and that's really not the case. I don't think anyone comes to the parenting table knowing everything. Speaking as a mom of 2 children, there was a lot to learn, but there were things I knew that I could be doing or my husband could be doing to facilitate that healthy mental and emotional growth in our children. And it's the same for adoptive children. Those same things that you know to do as a parent, don't think that has to differ just because you're adopting a child.
Yeah. So, I mean, you said that there's sometimes there's a fear. Adoptive parents get afraid when they hear this word of this word trauma.
Mm-hmm.
I, my own take on this is that we live in a world that's very preoccupied with
Mm-hmm.
trauma.
Sure.
That's very almost like it's trauma obsessed.
Sure.
No, that's how it seems to me. Being, I've been in, I've been exploring this area for a year now, and it's the one thing that everybody keeps on coming back to. So what hope if it, I talk about being trauma informed and hope obsessed,
Yeah.
rather than hope informed and trauma obsessed, I guess, or hopeful, trauma obsessed but hopeful. What is it? Why do parents why do you think that is? First off, do you think that my take on this is, to what extent do you think my take on this is accurate, this trauma obsession?
Well, it depends on how obsessed you are, Simon. I'm not sure what the level.
I mean the industry. I mean the industry. That's the area of adoption.
Mm-hmm.
It seems to be lots of people, lots of trainers selling or giving away lots of trauma training. It's like, you know, it seems to be the preoccupation, the obsession within the sector.
Yeah.
You know, rather than the sector in the world of adoption. It seems to be an obsession. I mean, am I just obsessed about trauma obsession, or is it really like this?
No, I think it really is like that. I mean, I think in coming over from, you know, the state where it's, you know, trauma informed care, trauma informed training, like that seemed to take precedence over the normal regular trainings that we would have through the year. And so even coming into the private sector, and now the offerings, it's still the same. There's just a lot of training and information on trauma informed care. And, you know, I think it's very important to have access to the resources, to the training, to, yes, be trauma informed in how you approach. But I also think, you know, I really hope that adoptive family adoptees can focus on those years after the trauma. Like that's where the living, like that's where you want to be. Like you don't want to be stuck at that place where your trauma happened or before and miss out on experiencing an abundant life that is very well possible. You know, at some point, I've just heard this said in trainings, like you have to stop being the victim. You have to stop victimizing yourself and really just embrace the life that is there for you to live. And I think that that's hard. I mean, if it were easy, there would be no need for like EMDR or other counseling techniques to get people to that place. But I think a lot of it lies within the individual as well. And it may be a daily mindset of setting yourself in that direction and orienting yourself of, I'm going to live this abundant life. Like I'm not going to continue to be the victim or to victimize myself. And so I think that there are just many factors that can play into a person experiencing that mental and emotional well-being. But I think a lot of it's choice. You choose to live that way. You choose to engage in activities and relationships that are going to fill your life with the good things that are necessary for promoting that personal growth. And I think that's, I mean, I don't want to be naive and say that's possible for everybody, but I think for many individuals, it's definitely possible to live a life away from the trauma. Like your years away from the trauma will grow the more you seek out the abundancy in living.
Yeah. You use the word choice there. So one of the most important breakthroughs I had on my consciousness journey about, I'm talking probably 12 years ago now, is the fact that most of us aren't choosing how we feel about ourselves, and how we think about ourselves and how we see ourselves most of the time. You know, we are beating ourselves up. We are listening to the negative voice in our head that's saying that, you know, we're not being a good parent, or we're not being a good mum, dad, brother, sister. We're not doing well enough for our, we're not doing well, you know, we should be coping better as a parent. And those are some of the things that I see all the time. That people aren't choosing. What's choosing instead? Well, essentially, and I speak for myself on this as well. It's the voice in our head. It's the conditioning that we've had. That's what's actually choosing how we are most of the time. So, you know, if we're not choosing, then it's not our fault, right?
If you're not choosing, then it's not your
It's not
fault.
our fault.
I don't know if I mean, I think every day you have the opportunity to make that choice, and it may be making that choice continually throughout the day. It's not a one choice, one day, one moment, and
No,
then
no.
you're set, right? So I think you constantly come to that crossroads of who you are, where you are, and what choice am I going to make at this crossroads that's going to help me to get beyond what my mind, what that inner voice is telling me. I
Yeah.
think it's possible.
Yeah.
I absolutely think it's possible. I tend to admire people. Like just yesterday, I saw this article on people.com because I love all things like celebrity news. And, this actress singer was showing this picture of this is where I was 4 years ago. And that was the last day. Like I made this choice to better myself, to stop doing the negative things that I was doing. And like I found myself thinking on that, like, how do how do you do that day in and day out without giving into that inner critic of, no, you can't do this, you won't accomplish, you won't succeed, or kind of what you're saying. But I don't think it's impossible. And I think to not choose and to let that voice overpower keeps you in that place of being the victim.
Yeah. What what um what do adoptive parents share with you on this subject?
On the subject of just trauma, or
No, on the subject of the inner critic, or the beating themselves up. Do they share that sort of stuff with you?
so, yes, some do. Some do, just to help process through
Yeah, yeah,
what that conversation is looking like and how that relates to how they're parenting their child. I will say, especially on the private side, families that come to us in the midst of like infertility, especially, why can't I just have a baby? Like, what's wrong with me? Like, that is really where I see a lot of that voice kind of dominating. Even after they receive the placement of a child in their home, it's just like that inner critic is still there, but it takes a different form. And so it's very real, and it's very present. But for most families I've seen, with the exception of probably one in our history, they've come around to like, okay, realizing I cannot allow these self-depreciating thoughts, negativity, to keep me in that place where I'm not giving and pouring into and investing well into my family, into this child that's now been brought into my family. Um, the one in which things took kind of a different route, unfortunately resulted in the disruption of that placement of that child because of not only the inner critic of like, why can't I do this? But I think some of the culture of the family, kind of the lack of openness to that particular child and where they came from. Unfortunately, it resulted in, I think, in my opinion, them just kind of succumbing to that. Like, it's not going to get any better. So we might as well just disrupt this placement and have this child moved out of our home. And I think that's so unfortunate, because I don't think that has to be the inroad necessarily.
yeah. Does the I alluded to the kind of like the trauma obsession stuff a couple of minutes ago. Does that feed into adoptive parents' fears?
I think so. Yeah, absolutely. I think it can. But I think it's also just perhaps a lack of knowledge. And I don't mean that as in like adoptive families don't want to know, like they just want to turn a blind eye. I think it's just the lack of knowledge of what adoption can present in your life, as far as what you're opening yourself up to when adopting a child. And I think for many families, and I'm speaking only from the history of our agency, they don't come realizing, just the effect of again, trauma on the brain when a baby is in utero carried for 9 months, and then, hearing his mother's voice and now being brought to another family that is completely unfamiliar. So that's kind of where it starts. I think for families, like the understanding of what the significance is, of trauma on the brain. And so most families are receptive, like they want to step into that place of learning as much as they can, and not, being so fearful to the point of like, well, we cannot care for this child. Like we don't see that very often. We see most families are willing to at least recognize those fears, call them out, but also do the work around them to work through those fears.
Yeah, yeah. I guess my concern, and my concern is this, that we have this narrative, we have this trauma narrative, that kind of like the primal wound narrative, which I don't agree with in terms of my experience, right?
Sure.
I guess my concern is that we are, lots of people are revving this trauma thing up, and that it becomes almost like not a self-fulfilling prophecy, but it becomes our focus. So, what we focus on gets bigger.
Sure.
That's why I'm in favor of being hope obsessed.
Sure.
Rather than trauma obsessed. And what I'm really getting at is adoptive parents, and it's a question, right? Adoptive parents seem to be getting bombarded with this trauma stuff. So we become hyper vigilant of it.
Sure.
Hyper vigilant of it. So we start seeing it everywhere. And because we're coming at it with this trauma mindset, we see the evidence everywhere. We become kind of preoccupied by it. Sure. And the obsession, and that's what I'm asking you, really, because I could see the danger of that happening.
Absolutely.
And because you've got the overview of what's happening within parents, you're a great person to have this conversation with.
Sure.
Because I may well be worrying completely unnecessarily, but it's just like I want to explore it, because I think it's how we see the world. I think Einstein said something like this. Whether we think the world is a friendly or unfriendly place is the biggest determinant of our emotional well-being, or something, of our happiness. And if so, how we're seeing this, how we see it, will inform how we parent our kids, and it will inform what we see.
I would agree, Simon. And something that you said and you keep coming back to is the element of hope, and what role does that play in your life? I mean, I think to lose all hope is to give up and to succumb, especially in this area of trauma. Like you have to, okay, in the midst of being bombarded with, everything that is there, that exists about trauma and trauma-informed care, I think you also have to recognize that we may not even be in that category as an adoptive family. Like that may not even be us. So let's not live our lives, like let's not go down that path to where that does become us because of our own actions, because we are so hyper vigilant about it that now we've created this atmosphere in which, that's all we've got to talk about over dinner, we're just going to be talking through the role of trauma in our lives. I mean, I think if you find yourself in that place and you're not leaning and walking towards hope and the hopefulness of the freedom that there is from that, then I just don't, it's hard to see or think that you would be thriving or that your child would be thriving. Like your home environment is not a thriving place for either you or for your child, or if your child has grown to an adult. And so I think you really have to be mindful of what you let in, kind of like being like, we've got to be gatekeepers, and to what we let in. But we also, I think, have to be very cognizant of what is there and address appropriately. If there are behaviors there that are trauma related, but it doesn't mean that every child that's adopted is going to grow up with this trauma related brain or lifestyle and just live their life that way. You know, I don't think that should by any means be the road that any adoptive family goes down, because that's not speaking truth of your life and who you are and the potential to be, you know, president of the United States if you wanted to be. You know, like, I think we have to be very mindful and very careful of what road we choose to take.
Yeah. And you used the word choose again, and the thing that pops straight into my head is that obviously no parent's going to see this, no parent's going to choose this. And
sure.
So if you are, like, listener, if you are getting, you know, you're seeing trauma evidence everywhere all the day, and you know, I have become the reason that I'm so big on this topic is because, you know, I didn't feel that I was wounded until I read The Primal Wound. Yeah.
Okay.
So sorry?
I'm not super familiar with The Primal Wound. Like I've just not heard that terminology.
Okay. So it's a book by Nancy. It's a book by Nancy Verrier, who was an American MD, medical doctor, so a GP in UK language, general practitioner, and she had two daughters. I'm not sure which order it was. One was biological and one was adopted, and she put forward this primal wound, this theory of a primal wound, which is that adoptees are forever wounded through the separation from their birth mothers. And it has become a very strong narrative. So I have adoptive parents and prospective adoptive parents talking to me about this, you know, emailing me about this book, saying, everybody says to read this Primal Wound, and it's I've read it and it's very pessimistic. It's very and that, you know, and then you know, people have gone into adoptee, you know, going to adoption Facebook groups, and everybody says read the Primal Wound, and everybody's warning. Right. So there's this area, the two truths are the adoption is beautiful, and adoptees are primarily wounded. Right. Those are the two. In society these days, we're looking for very strict, very simple, oversimplistic views of the world, and clearly that's not the truth, you know. For me, reading The Primal Wound made me feel that I was wounded, you know, and it took me down. And I talk about this quite a lot, but I think it's worth repeating. So have you ever been in a swimming pool with a beach ball and you or a soccer ball, and you try and push the ball down in the water? Yeah, push it, you submerge it, you push it down. So you push it down, you get some above it, and it goes down. So but then when you let go of it, it springs up further than it went down. So you might push it down a foot, but when it springs up, the force of gravity or whatever, the force in the water, it bounces up 2 foot higher. So it comes back higher after it. And this for me is that's what happened to me. So I went down reading this book, and then when I realized that for me, I wasn't primarily wounded, when I realized the truth, that took me higher. And we hear so much talk about post-traumatic stress, but we hear very little talk of post-traumatic growth. That for me is what that analogy sums up what post-traumatic growth is. You go down, but you bounce back higher.
Sure.
And that's the reason I see hope. But I did the work that helped me see through the fact that I wasn't wounded.
Sure. And that was going to be my question. Like, what did it take for you to bounce back higher? And you just answered it.
It needed me to see it. It needed me to have an insight, a sight from within, to see something new for myself. To have, you talked about being, you talked about spiritual well-being, and you talked about being a Christian. I'm into practical spirituality and stuff like that. I'm not a practicing Christian, but for me, the biblical word on this would be epiphany. Yeah. So we've got this world that is a world that's obsessed with strategies, and not insights. Insights are what change. Insights are what change our world.
Yeah. Right? Yes.
So, in my opinion.
Sure.
So why I'm laboring all this and going quite deep in this, all this stuff about like if I'm being bombarded by trauma obsession, trauma messages, is because I'm hoping that I prompt some insights within our listeners, and they say, yeah, actually, I've been taking some of that stuff on board, and Simon's saying, Crystal's saying that we're not wounded, that we can put trauma behind them. That is going to affect. I'm hoping to prompt some insights within the listeners so that their view of how they see their child changes, because when their view of how they see their child changes, their child will feel it, and their child will live into how their parent sees them. If we think that we are wounded, I see this. I saw something today about National Adoption Month. Somebody saying, so we're recording this on the 2nd of November, listeners, and National Adoption Month. People are saying that I heard somebody saying that they're not getting involved in it. They're finding it too draining. And I'm thinking, yeah, what?
Where's that coming from?
Where's that coming from? How can that how can that affect anybody? And the gentle laugh, the gentle and comical exploration or example I always give about where our feelings come from is the weather, right? So we're conditioned. Do you have this in Tennessee? Do you have miserable weather?
At times, yes.
So how does the weather make you miserable? Because it makes us miserable here in the UK as well. How does that work?
Yeah. When it's rainy, it's gloomy, there's no sunshine. You feel like there's nothing to be happy about in life. I can't even get outside the house.
Yeah. But how does that actually work? Have you ever been happy in the rain?
Maybe as a child, I recall splashing in puddles, and I see
Yeah.
that absolutely with my own two children.
Yeah.
That makes them very happy to do.
So yeah. So it's like the meaning that we give the weather. We give the weather supernatural powers
Sure,
to change the way that we feel.
sure.
And we're conditioned into doing that. We wouldn't choose to do that, would we? We wouldn't choose to be cheesed off because it's raining.
But
So
we're so conditioned.
we're conditioned, yeah. So we're not choosing, and you know, and we wouldn't choose to let National Adoption Awareness Month cheese us off. You know, it's draining. It's draining. What? No. So so yeah, this is my kind of, this is my stuff. So but this is an interview with you, so we spent a bit too much talking about
But
my.
you've given me much insight here, and of course questions
Go for
formulate
it.
just about, do you find many adoptees and adoptive parents who have come to that place where you speak about, like your analogy, just it's going to forever stick out in my mind, of really rising above, like, okay, the post-traumatic growth, the post-traumatic thriving nature of life? Do you find much connection with parents or adoptees who are living that as well, who are doing the work, wanting to do the work because they recognize that there is hope in living beyond the trauma of adoption?
It's very variable, I would say. It's
Okay.
very variable. So I find I've done a fair bit of work with non-adoptive parents, right? And I find adoptive parents more curious and more keen
Sure.
to do the work, you know. So they know there may be challenges ahead, and therefore they tend to be more proactive. Yeah. Do I don't I find very fierce advocates. I find adopted parents very fierce advocates for their kids. I think they really advocate very strongly in a great way, for their kids. But I do, and they're keen to do the work. What I see more and more parents, adoptive parents, seeing that the trend that gives me hope is that more and more parents are seeing it's about them, not about their kids. So in my relationship with my wife, I can't affect my wife. I can only affect me.
Sure.
It's the same. It's the same in any relationship. So
Absolutely.
it's about our self-awareness.
Sure.
The people that are listening to this podcast, it's about our self-awareness, not about our kids. So
Yes.
it's about our level of consciousness. It's about our hope. It's about our emotional intelligence. It's about us. It's not. It's pretty much nothing to do with parenting techniques, I don't think. In the same way as, you know, when we're running a business, it's not. You know, people say, you know, culture eats strategy for breakfast. People say that in big businesses. So it's about how the people in the business are feeling rather than what they do. Yeah. And I would say, you know, in this world, you know, in this parenting world, or in this relationship world, it's about our internal culture. So how I am feeling, that is the biggest determinant. And if I am the the more conscious, the more aware I am, the higher I am, the higher level that I'm operating at, the better the stuff I will, the better stuff I will do.
Mm-hmm.
That's how I see. That's how I see. And I would say the counterpart of that is those parents looking for parenting techniques,
Mm-hmm.
business owners looking for business techniques, all that sort of stuff. I see that as a rather because I've been down that road as well. It's
Mm-hmm.
rather unfruitful.
Mm-hmm.
It's a rather unfruitful road. We have to look within. So for me, this is about who we are underneath the trauma, because yeah, there's a lot there. Does that make any sense?
It does. Yeah, it makes absolute sense. I mean, those are all things that I know for me as the director of my agency, and also just the business side of things, and the balance that, we spoke to early in our conversation. And I think even going back to our very first conversation that we had, and we talked about epiphany, and we talked about just relationship and connection and story, and those things that we connect to, or the realizations that we have that result in that growth. And, I think that we have to be mindful of what you just said, like who we are, our level of self-awareness, how we are functioning. Others are going to be attracted to that, or they're going to be repelled by that. But I think we, as humans, we have a responsibility to ourselves and to each other, I think, really to bring others into the journey with us. And I think in doing that, we will find that our awareness increases for ourselves and for others. And I think that's one of the highest goods that we can do for others. And the highest forms of loving others well is serving them. Loving them like ourselves, so to speak. So though we can only affect change within ourselves, I can't change my husband, he can only change himself. But the work I do for myself, that is ultimately going to either bring others into a place of, hey, I want to do that too. Like, I want to be an imitator of that and walk this journey with Crystal as the director of Hope Center, as my friend, as that crazy girl that I know that likes to line dance. I don't know. But, we have to be willing to pull others into that journey with us. And I think that first starts with recognizing who we are, where we are, how we're functioning, and increasing that level of awareness for ourselves.
Yeah. Could you talk into that from the perspective, you talk that you're a mom to two kids. Can you talk into that from a perspective of a mum? Because for me, adoptive mum, bio mum, it makes no odds really with what we're talking about here. But I'd love to that, me and my missus haven't even got any kids, right? So I'd love to, rather than Simon Ben's theoretical, I was going to use a rude word then, but I won't. Simon Ben's theory, right? Let's go for Crystal's practice. What does this mean in practice for you, and being a mum? And you don't need to share anything that you don't want to talk about, but what does it mean? What's the essence of this? What's the essence of this for you as a mom?
I think the essence is, as a mom, asking myself, okay, what attributes do I want my children to demonstrate? What attributes can I communicate to my children that in turn is going to allow them the space to communicate and reciprocate that back to me, but also communicate those to others? And that, I don't think that is so much biological DNA. Like, I think that's more environment, that's more nurturing. And, just for instance, just the other night, it was Halloween. And so we took our kids out to get loads of candy, of course. And my daughter, she's 2.5. We went to my parents' house afterwards, and she was just like sharing her candy with everyone. Like, here you go, grandma. Here you go, papa. And I made this comment. I said, wow, she's just so kind to do that at 2.5, and it's candy at that. She did not see any reason to hoard that for herself. And it just got me thinking about, well, where did she learn kindness? Where did she learn to sacrifice, a piece of candy here or there or whatever it may be? And I think it's just, I desire for her to be kind. So I'm kind to her. I'm generous to her. I share with her the things of my life that I think are worth sharing. And that's not to say that there aren't boundaries there. Obviously there have to be, but she's imitating what's been shown to her. And so as a parent, I think we have to remember that it's not about the biological connection that we pass on to our children. It's not always about that, I should say, but it really is about what we are demonstrating and communicating to them through our actions, through our words. That's where we're going to see them turn around and hopefully be the thriving individuals that will launch well into, adolescence and into adulthood. But I think it starts with us first. Like we have to be willing to invest those things in our children. And when we don't, and then we wonder why our kids come back like, rude or crazy or just, excuse my French, like little hellions. A lot of that is because of what we are not investing in them. So I really think it comes down to pouring into and passing on those attributes that we want our children to see and know of us as parents.
Yeah.
So I hope I didn't offend anybody with.
I'm sure you didn't. So the thing that the thing that popped into my head was I use this quite a lot, is the Gandhi quote, "Be the change that you want to see in the world."
Mm-hmm.
So or if you want to be slightly more techniquey, you could say modeling.
Sure.
No.
That's
So it depends. It's like it starts with us.
mm-hmm. It does, absolutely.
It starts with us. And the it. So what's the it?
I'm sorry, what's the what?
What's the we say it starts with us. What's the it? What's the it?
I don't know if there is an end. I mean, I don't know if it's like when you pay it forward, you keep paying it forward with the hope of inspiring change. And change cannot, like, that's like the one constant in life. Like there's always room for change, for growth, to evolve. And even after death, that it continues to be paid forward. The actions, who you are in life, if you're inspiring others, that's going to continue. Like that's just going to continue to overflow from your life into someone else's life. And that's the hope. I mean, that's what I hope. I hope that at the end of my days, who I was on this earth is still communicated through the actions of my children and their children and their children and their friends. And so I just don't think it doesn't end. And I think that to me, like, that's love. Like it's endless. It's timeless. It transcends.
It certainly does. And for me, that the love and the love so for me, it starts with us. The it is everything.
Mhm.
Love, behavior, attributes, hope.
Mhm.
Yeah, it all starts with us.
Mhm.
Everything.
Absolutely.
And is, you also talked about change is constant, right? Well, the change is constant, and it, unless we are weighed down by the past,
Mhm.
unless we're weighed down by the past, and so there's a religious thing, isn't there, where there's a religious quote from the Bible, something like, where there is no hope, the people perish.
Mhm.
I don't know. Well, so that's the kind of like the if we're being, so this is a metaphor I use quite a lot. So a friend of mine, mentor of mine, said, helium does, sorry, encouragement does for people what helium does to balloons.
Mm.
You got a helium balloon, right?
Yeah.
So that if we, what I see a lot of is people who are in the basket, trying to pull the burner to blow the helium to
Mhm.
set the balloon going, right? And then you've got all these people with trauma bags trying to throw the trauma at them.
Mhm.
So people say to me, well, you were suppressing it. You didn't feel wounded. You didn't feel, and they don't always say it, and they don't say it quite as directly as this. I said to them, well, I didn't feel wounded till I read the Primal Wound. Yes, but all this trauma that you went through, you may not have been aware of it. You were suppressing it. It was waiting to be triggered. It was always within you. And they're just like, they're just,
Mm.
they're putting, they're trauma dumping. They're dumping trauma into my balloon to
Mhm.
stop me,
Sure.
taking off. So
It's
I
the
don't know.
air, right? They're filling your balloon with air and expecting you to rise, but but it's to, they're different densities. And so you've got to recognize what's the lighter of the two here. Obviously, the helium is going to allow you to float. Um, but I think that's our culture. I think the more trauma informed we become, the more it's like the hypervigilance and those words of you're suppressing, there's really something there. And it's like, really, there's not. And that's okay. I mean, I've got many friends walking this journey of like, I'm going to counseling and my counselor saying there's something there that I'm just not letting out. And I'm like, well, have you thought that maybe there really isn't anything there? Like you're okay, like, and I think sometimes what's normal, so to speak, we can't let someone else's normal define what our normal is, right? We are unique individuals created with unique giftings, talents, all sorts of things that are unique to us. And we need to live in that. I don't want to live in that space of Sarah over there, because Sarah was not created the same genes, whatever that I was. And so I think just recognizing that, hey, we are individuals and we have the freedom to express and to live and to be and to find our own normal, and that's okay. That is
Great.
okay.
That sounds like a great place to stop.
Sure. Well, I've so enjoyed this, Simon. Thank you
Thank
for
you.
the conversation.
And
And
thank you, listeners.
Absolutely, yes. And I hope that listeners are encouraged and inspired through
Good.
the work that you're doing.
The way we're doing.
The work that we're doing. Yes, yes, absolutely.
Thanks a lot, listeners. And thank you,
Thank you.
Crystal.